Two teams in a pretty massive need for victory hit the Rogers Place ice on Friday. I'll tell you all about what happened between the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Edmonton Oilers and who the big standouts for me were in last night's game. But before I do, please be sure to support the channel by hitting the subscribe button. So moving on here, Friday's game between the Penguins and the Oilers, it stands to reason that both these teams would have their recent histories pretty fresh on their minds coming into Friday night's game. Edmonton lost an absolute heartbreaker of a game in overtime to the Carolina Hurricanes on Tuesday night after being up 2-0 in that game. Pittsburgh, before Friday's game, had lost 3 consecutive outings, including a Tuesday night shootout loss at the hands of the Calgary Flames. So Oilers fans, of course, on Tuesday had to watch Frederik Andersen stand on his head. He made 33 saves to steal the victory for the Carolina Hurricanes in overtime. And early on in Friday's game against Pittsburgh, it looked somewhat alarmingly like Joel Blomqvist could do much of the same things that Frederik Andersen did, because Pittsburgh's 22-year-old goaltender looked absolutely awesome in this game. He looked incredibly sharp, especially early on, and it continued for the whole game, and he was so busy too. He got over 50 shots by the end of the game. Don't forget that Pittsburgh desperately need a goaltender to step up. Tristan Jarry has not been good enough of late, and this stick save from Blomqvist here on Draisaitl was one of his best of the game. It was just another chance for Draisaitl's line with Vasily Podkolzin and Victor Arvidsson, who were buzzing all night. Blomqvist makes another great save off Podkolzin here, and Pittsburgh came very, very close to rewarding their goaltender with a goal throughout. Stuart Skinner had to be sharp from start to finish of this game. The closest Pittsburgh came was maybe this chance here with Lars Eller walking into the slot and ringing a hard wrist shot off the crossbar and out. And for the Edmonton Oilers, it did finally come 13 minutes into the second period, and it was Edmonton's, like I said, their best line throughout the game of Leon Draisaitl with Victor Arvidsson and Vasily Podkolzin, and they go to work here. It's a very nifty little pass from Arvidsson to tip it up. Draisaitl does really, really well here to make a fantastic move in the middle of the ice. He sends the rush away. Draisaitl walking in down the right side, and that shot is a laser beam. It's perfect. Low blocker off the post and in, and it took Edmonton 34 shots to finally beat Blomqvist, but Draisaitl does so there, finally gets it into the back of the net to give the Oilers a 1-0 lead. Edmonton rejigged some forward lines and defense pairings in this game. I'll talk about not only what they did to both the forwards and the defense, I'll talk about this Draisaitl line a little bit more, but before I do, I want to rewind back to Tuesday, and if you watched my recap of that game, you'll know that Evan Bouchard had a tough night. He wasn't very good defensively, quite frankly. He was at least partially at fault for jumping the zone on the overtime goal late on in the OT period. So a bounce back Friday was going to be crucial for Bouchard, and Bouchard's big moment in this game came late in the second period, and it's more good work from the Draisaitl line to set this up. Victor Arvidsson's going to get the puck here with some time on the left side half wall, and if we pause, this is some really great recognition by Arvidsson, because by this point in the shift, the Pens were completely hemmed in the defensive zone, and they had been for quite a while, and you can see how deep this very tired group of Penguins were sitting. They were collapsing on the goal, and as we let the clip run, Arvidsson recognizes that, and then he'll move into space. He'll use it to his advantage in front of him before opening up the passing lane and snapping the pass to Evan Bouchard. And once the pass gets through, Bouchard himself does a really good job. He walks into space before picking his spot through the screen of Anthony Beauvillier and beating Blomqvist in net to make it 2-0 Edmonton. And the Edmonton Oilers, much like on Tuesday night, now up 2-0. They're in a similar spot to the spot they were against the Carolina Hurricanes. And looking back to Tuesday again, as much as anything else, Edmonton's loss was largely up to the fact that they had a seeming inability to close things out while they were up 2-0. So early in the third period, it didn't take long for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins to ensure that Friday's game was going to be different. It's his first goal of the season to make it 3-0 on the steal in front of the net. So Pittsburgh kept pushing from there, but every single time, not just while the Edmonton Oilers had the lead, but throughout this game, any time that Pittsburgh had asked questions of Stuart Skinner, he had an answer when he was tested, and Stuart Skinner's saves proved to be enough this time to keep his team in front, and he was rewarded by the team in front of him. Mattias Ekholm scores a late power play goal. He finds the shot through traffic and in to make it 4-0 Edmonton. Later on in the game, Marcus Pettersson threw a hit on Victor Arvidsson. Darnell Nurse stepped up to fight Pettersson later on, but in the end of the day, the 4-0 scoreline in favor of the Edmonton Oilers was enough for Edmonton to secure the win, and Stuart Skinner did enough to earn himself a 27-save shutout. The Oilers now move to within a win of 500, and Edmonton are now preparing to embark on a 4-game road trip. They're going to go through Detroit, Columbus, Nashville, and Calgary. And on paper, that is no doubt 4 teams that Edmonton will, more likely than not, be favored to win against, meaning that hopefully the Oilers are looking at this road trip as a significant opportunity for their team to make some headway up the Pacific Division standings here. Of course, Calgary's on a roll. They're at the top of that division. That game will be hard. Nashville have been disappointing so far, but we know what their roster can do on paper. Detroit and Columbus both have kind of been a little bit all over the place this season. They've shown at different times some really solid performances, but of course, we don't know how they're going to look against the Oilers. So moving on from Edmonton's game, moving on from talking about the road trip, because I did want to talk about 2 really, really big standouts for me from Friday's game against Pittsburgh, and it shouldn't be a secret or a surprise that the first thing I'm going to touch on here is goaltending, because if you look at Stuart Skinner's numbers so far this season, they don't even really look particularly superb. They're solid, but they don't jump off the page as great. But if you watch these games, Skinner's looked really, really solid throughout this year so far. And at the end of the day, a goaltender that gives you confidence is truly crucial for a contender. So for the Edmonton Oilers, having Skinner be consistent this season is going to be massive. He has been so far, and that has to be commended. So fingers crossed that Edmonton can continue to get this level of goaltending from their goaltenders. And the next big standout for me, aside from Stuart Skinner and the very, very countless saves he was seemingly making here on the Pittsburgh Penguins during this game, was the second line of Leon Draisaitl between Victor Arvidsson and Vasily Podkolzin, because that trio looked excellent all night long. Arvidsson ended up with 3 assists in the game, and it was kind of easy to see why when you're watching this game, because his passing and his puck movement was really good all night long, and him and Podkolzin both consistently found ways to be in the right spot at the right time. They were both constantly involved in the play all night long, and Draisaitl was Draisaitl. He was electric all night. He, of course, ended up scoring the eventual game winner. So we're going to take a step back here and look at the Edmonton Oilers forward lines with this second line together, and I love Jeff Skinner, and he's been really awesome of late. But when you have Skinner playing on this third line with Henrique and Brown, and then Podkolzin with Draisaitl and Arvidsson, that kind of gives you a really capable middle 6 here. Both lines can do anything, and Skinner's skill on that third line I think is crucial to their offensive capabilities. I know it's only one game that we've seen this setup, but I definitely liked what I saw, not just out of the forwards, but the deep pairings looked better too. Of course, Evan Bouchard had a better game, but Troy Stecher and Darnell Nurse looked better together than Nurse and Dermott had on Tuesday, and I do think Ty Emberson looks better in the third pairing role. It's a role that better suits him. Him and Brett Kulak have looked solid together. Kulak's been good actually so far this season as a whole. I'm not sold on this setup as a long-term option. I'm definitely not sold that the Edmonton Oilers are going to be a contender with Darnell Nurse and Troy Stecher as their second pairing, but it performed quite admirably last night. Last note for today, a little update just before we step aside for the day. Last note, Edmonton have a new jersey sponsor on their away threads. Carbon X and the Oilers are hopping into a partnership, so Oilers fans are going to get used to this logo on their white jerseys for not just this season, but reportedly through the 2026-27 season as well. That's going to be all for me today. Thanks for watching this episode of Oilers Digest.